So today we're going to be working with for loops. In Python, for loops are super easy and we often just use them to iterate through lists, tuples, or anything that wants iterating. And the beauty of Python is that we don't if we want to iterate through an entire list, we don't even need to know the size of a list. We can just do it simply with let's define a list first. So we'll say a bunch of numbers and they're going to be equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then all we have to do to iterate through it and print them, for example, so one thing we might want to do is say for I in numbers. So numbers is our list, and I is just represents the current element. So it represents, as we iterate through it, it represents 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And this can be anything, right? So this could be num, and we'll keep it as num. That makes sense. So for num in numbers. Or if you really wanted to make it more readable, you could say for number in numbers. What we're going to do is we're going to print the number. Again, this can be anything. And if we execute this, then as above there, then we get 1 to 5 as we expect. Alternatively, we might not actually want to iterate through an entire list, but actually through a certain range of a list, in which case we would actually change this for loop slightly. So what we're going to say now is for number in, and we're going to change this to the range function. Whoops. And we're going to start at, say, 2. So 2 is going to be starting at 3, of course, because this is position 0, this is position 1, this is position 2. So everything from 2, including 2, all the way to, we're going to use length of numbers. So this is going to be 5, of course, because the total size of this list is 5. So we're going to now iterate through everything from position 2, which is here, all the way to here, including both start and end points. And we want to change this slightly. So this now no longer represents a number, really, so it's not very it's not very readable. We might want to change this to position now, right? Because this range here now represents a position rather than the actual element itself. So what we would actually want to do now is, and again it can be anything, but we would do numbers, and then we'd have, so we want to print a list element, and the list element is going to be at position pos. You could have kept that numbers and made this numbers, or again if you wanted to be shorthand, just do I or J or K or something like that. So let's execute this now. And we've made a mistake. So the mistake we encountered there was that I forgot to put a colon at the end. So if we go ahead and execute this now, then we'll get the 3, 4 and 5. So what we did before, we kind of said for, x in numbers, then we just iterated through the list, but what that doesn't allow us to do then is iterate through 2 lists, for example, which the range function does allow us. So we had numbers 2, and numbers 2 was just something like 6, 7, 8, 9, and we'll make it 10 as well, so they're the same size. So we've now got a second list, and what we could do is we could have a sort of if statement, and we could say if length of numbers is equal to len numbers 2. So all we're saying here is if both lists are equal in size, then we can go ahead and execute this for loop, and that's going to be for pos in range, and we're just going to make that the total, we want it to be the entire list though, so we're going to say, we can choose either here, of course, because they are the same size, so you can here have numbers 2 or numbers, or if you really wanted to, so that's how you do it. And what we're going to do now is we can print these. So we're now going to be actually printing elements from both lists inside this one for loop. And what we're going to do now is just say numbers, and it's going to go, so we'll do numbers like this, and we're going to do placeholder, and then we're going to say numbers 2, and then we're going to have another placeholder, and then we're going to use the .format method, and here it's just going to be numbers. And remember, we're dealing with the indices at the moment, the index, sorry, so this actually needs to be pos because we're not iterating through the list specifically, just through the range that we've set upon. And just like that, so if we get rid of all of this below here, what should now happen is it should notice that 7, 8, 9, 19, for some reason, I meant 10. So these two lists are now exactly the same length. So if they're the same length, then we're going to go into this for loop, and this for loop is basically going to create a range for us, which is going to go from 0 to 5, and then we're going to print 1 and 6, 2 and 7, 3 and 8, 4 and 9, 5 and 10. So let's have a look at that. Hopefully we don't have any mistakes. And just as I said, we've got numbers 1, numbers 2, 6. So that's a way that we can kind of use one for loop to iterate through multiple lists. And you could just keep going with this, of course, and then just add, you know, if we had numbers 3 was equal to some kind of other list, then you would just come down here and add another placeholder, of course. And then we're just using exactly the same position, so numbers 3. And we'll just use pos. So we're not going to execute that, of course, because we haven't made a list, but we could do that. And you can just keep going with that. So that can be useful. Example, if you're tracking like a 3D object in time, you might actually have 4 lists, right? You might have something that represents x coordinates, y coordinates, z coordinates, and then time. And then each one of these, you know, these will have time values, these will have the z, y, and x coordinates. And then, so if I just give a quick example that we won't actually execute, we might have x coordinate as 1, our y coordinate is 2, and our z coordinate is 3, and then the time might be, you know, 0.5 seconds. And if you wanted to print all of them in one line, you would kind of go for I in range, you know, if they were all the same length, you would use the same as this. You would check that all of them actually had the same length in terms of the lists, which they should do because they have all the corresponding values. And then just like this, we could then print x, y, z, and the time. So that's a really powerful statement, and we're now going to look at some nested for loops. So we're now going to look at nested for loops, and they're really powerful too. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create this list quickly, or 2D array, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to have brackets like this, so square brackets. And inside here, we're going to have each one of our elements is actually going to have another little list in it. So this is a 2-dimensional array. And we're going to do 2, 5, 6, and then another comma, and then more square brackets, and then we're going to have 7, 8, 9. So the way you can kind of view this right now is we've got a list, and that list consists of 3 more lists, and then the first list has values from 1 to 3, the second list has values from 4 to 6, and the third list has values from 7 to 9. So that's like a 2D array, right? Because we've got, it's a list within a list. So at position 0 right now, so if we actually print length of list 2D, we're going to call it, then what we're actually going to get is the value 3, of course, because that list itself only has 3 elements. And what we can do with nested for loops is we can actually iterate this, right? We can actually iterate and the way this, by the way, before I actually go and do that, this is actually quite common. If you think about how images are stored in computers, they kind of they'll have positions, but then each so you have like a pixel value, say at the position 0, 0, you can think of that as a list already, 2D list. It will have another list of 3 values, RGB values, right? So at position 1, you might have something which is black, in which case it would be 0, 0, 0, or something which is white. I mean, I don't want to confuse you with RGB if you don't know anything about it, but then 255, which is a mixture of all colors, this represents the color white. So that could be one element, right? So the first pixel then here could be 255. Right, so the way we would access that then, the way we print that is we would say, well, we have our same for loop as before, so we're going to just say for element, hopefully that's not a keyword, yeah, so we're going to say for element in list 2D, well, what do we want to do if we printed it right now, if we decided to print element, what do you think the outcome would be? The outcome would be that we would print this, we would print this, and then we would print this. So let's just go ahead and check that, because that is the elements. So there you go. Those are the 3 lists. So how do we access each of those elements then on a deeper level, you know, individually? How do we access that? So what we can do now is, maybe we should say for list and list. Now we want to access, and then for element. Now what do we want to access now? Well, we want to access what's at this position. And what's this position? Well, it's list. It's this LST thingy. So we're going to say for element in LST, then what we're going to do is we're going to print element. So hopefully you're following with me there, or following me there. So what we're saying right now is, for each list within this big list, what we're going to do is for each element within that list, right, we're going to print the element. So what this is going to do for us, hopefully, is print all of these elements now. So let's go ahead and print that. We'll execute the script, and the first 3 is just the size. If you remember, we've got that up here and up here. So just as we expected, we're getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9. So that's everything on for loops. Hopefully you've learnt something, and thank you for watching.